Laura had never thought much about massages. Her husband, Daniel, was the one who always talked about how stress built up in the body, how relaxation was a form of healing. But lately, Daniel had seemed different, calmer, lighter, even happier. And Laura, who had spent the last few years feeling like their marriage was slowly fading into routine, noticed it right away. They had been married for 15 years, living in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. Their days looked the same. Daniel working long hours as a financial consultant, Laura managing the house and part-time design work from home. Their conversations had become short and practical about bills, groceries, and family updates, but not about them. One evening, Daniel came home smiling, a rare sight these days. "You look relaxed," Laura said, half joking. "I am," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "Finally found something that actually helps. A massage therapist, Emily. She's amazing. I can't remember the last time my shoulders felt this good." Laura raised an eyebrow. "You, a massage?" He laughed. "Yeah, I know. But trust me, this woman knows what she's doing. You should try her out." She smiled politely. "Maybe I will," was a simple exchange. But that night, Laura lay awake thinking about it. It wasn't jealousy that stirred in her. It was curiosity, or maybe something deeper. Daniel hadn't looked this peaceful in months. And it stung a little that someone else had helped him get there. A few days later, Laura decided to go. She didn't tell Daniel, she just wanted to see for herself. The wellness studio was small but elegant, soft lighting and a scent of lavender in the air. A calm voice greeted her at the front desk. "Hi, you must be Laura. Daniel mentioned you might stop by." Laura looked up. The woman was in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a professional warmth that filled the room. "I'm Emily," she said, extending her hand. "So nice to meet you." Laura smiled. "My husband said you were the best." Emily laughed softly. "That's sweet of him. Let's see what we can do for you today." Inside the massage room, everything was tranquil, soft piano music, dim lights, a faint scent of jasmine. Emily worked with quiet precision, her movements calm and practiced. Laura felt her tension melt away, and for the first time in months, she felt at peace. "You hold a lot of stress here," Emily said gently, pressing on Laura's shoulders. "Yeah," Laura murmured. "Life, I guess." Emily smiled. "We all need to learn to let go sometimes." When the session ended, Laura sat up, feeling strangely emotional. She looked at the framed quote on the wall. "Healing begins when you allow yourself to feel." Those words lingered in her mind long after she left. That night, Daniel noticed the change immediately. "You look different," he said. "Guess your masseuse works miracles." Laura replied with a faint smile. He grinned. "Told you, she was great." They both laughed. But something about the conversation felt oddly fragile, like glass that could shatter with the wrong word. Over the next few weeks, Daniel kept going back to Emily. He said it helped with his back pain. But Laura noticed subtle things. How his mood changed after his appointments. How he smiled when her name came up. There was nothing wrong in what he said, nothing inappropriate. Yet something didn't feel right. One evening, while they were watching TV, Laura asked casually, "You've been seeing Emily a lot lately, huh?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, twice a week, sometimes 3. She's that good. 3 times." Laura repeated softly, pretending not to sound surprised. "Why? You jealous?" He teased lightly. She smiled faintly. "No, just curious." He laughed and turned his attention back to the screen. But Laura's mind stayed elsewhere. She told herself not to overthink it. Daniel wasn't the type to cheat. He was loyal, responsible. The kind of man who forgot their anniversary but never forgot to pay the mortgage. Still, a quiet unease began to settle in her chest. One Friday, Laura decided to stop by Daniel's office with lunch, something she hadn't done in a long time. But when she arrived, his assistant looked puzzled. "Oh, Daniel left early," she said. "Said he had a personal appointment." Laura froze for a second, masking her surprise with a polite smile. "Oh, right. Of course. Thanks." She didn't need to ask where he went. Her instincts told her everything. That evening, when Daniel came home, she noticed the faint scent of citrus oil on him, the same kind Emily used in her studio. "How was your day?" she asked quietly. "Busy," he replied, loosening his tie. "You?" "Same," she said softly, but her heart was pounding. Later, when he fell asleep, Laura sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. She didn't want to be suspicious. She wanted to trust him. But trust was something fragile, easy to give. It's hard to rebuild once it cracked. A week later, Laura returned to Emily's studio. She told herself it was just for another massage, but deep down, she wanted to understand what made this woman so different. Emily greeted her with that same warm smile. "Back again. That's great. How have you been feeling?" "Better," Laura said, forcing a smile. "Daniel says you've been helping him a lot too." Emily nodded. "He's been making great progress. It's nice to see him taking care of himself." There was nothing suspicious in her tone, just professional warmth. Still, Laura's heart twisted. When the session began, Laura tried to relax, but her thoughts wouldn't stop. She thought about the years she'd spent building this marriage. The way Daniel used to look at her, the laughter that used to fill their home. Somewhere along the way, that closeness had been replaced by silence, and now, perhaps, by someone else's voice at the end of the session. Emily said gently, "You seem tense today." Laura smiled sadly. "Maybe I just think too much." Emily gave her a kind look. "Sometimes we all do." That night, Laura decided to talk to Daniel. Not accuse, not confront, just talk. "I've been thinking." She began carefully as they sat in bed. "We haven't really spent much time together lately. Maybe we should take a weekend trip, just us." Daniel looked surprised. "A trip?" "Yeah," she said softly, "like we used to. Remember when we went to Lake Michigan that summer? It was nice." He hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know, Laura. Things are hectic at work right now." "You could make time if you wanted to," she said gently, looking at him. He met her eyes, then smiled faintly. "You're right. I'll think about it." But something in his tone felt distant, rehearsed later that night when he fell asleep. Laura opened her old journal, a habit she had stopped years ago. She began to write, her hand trembling slightly. "I miss him," she wrote. "I miss who we used to be. Maybe love doesn't end suddenly. Maybe it just fades quietly until one day you wake up beside someone you don't fully know anymore." Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them quickly, closing the book. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel flashed across the screen, "Working late again tomorrow. Don't wait up." She stared at the text for a long time, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe it. She truly did, but deep down she knew something was changing. Something she couldn't control, and for the first time, Laura wasn't sure if what hurt more was the fear of losing Daniel or the feeling that she already had. The next few weeks passed in uneasy quiet. Daniel was often late coming home, and when he did, he seemed distracted. Polite, kind even, but distant. Laura tried to convince herself that work was to blame. That was the easy answer. But deep down she sensed something had shifted between them. Something small but sharp enough to leave a mark. She started noticing little things. His phone, which once lay openly on the counter, was now always face down. His scent was different too, not his usual cologne, but something light, herbal, familiar. The same smell she'd noticed at Emily's studio. One night as she was clearing the dinner table, his phone buzzed. He was in the shower, so instinctively she looked at it. A message flashed across the screen. "Same time tomorrow." No name, just a number. Her heart skipped. It could have been work. Daniel had plenty of clients. Still, something in her gut whispered otherwise. She didn't touch the phone. She couldn't. Instead, she sat on the couch, waiting for him to return, her mind racing. When he walked in, towel draped around his shoulders, she smiled faintly, pretending nothing was wrong. "How was your day?" she asked. He shrugged. "Busy, as always." "You?" "Same," she said softly. But she knew something wasn't the same at all. Over the next few days, Laura began paying closer attention. Not spying, not searching for proof, just observing. She noticed how Daniel seemed more careful, how he'd linger on his phone and then quickly put it away, how he'd talk about Emily's studio casually, like it was no big deal, but with a tone that felt almost careful. One Friday evening, she decided to test the waters. "I was thinking of booking another massage," she said casually as they had dinner. He looked up quickly, then forced a calm smile. "That's a great idea. Emily will be happy to see you again." There was something in his eyes, a flicker of unease. Laura caught it immediately. The next morning, Laura made an appointment. She didn't tell Daniel. She needed clarity, not from him, but from her own heart. When she arrived, Emily greeted her warmly, as always. "Laura, it's so nice to see you again." Laura smiled. "I've been meaning to come back. Things have been stressful lately." Emily nodded kindly. "Let's help with that." As the session began, Laura tried to relax. The room was calm, the scent soothing, but her mind was restless. She watched Emily move around the room with grace, her voice gentle, her hands steady. It was impossible not to see why Daniel had felt comfortable here. Halfway through the session, Emily spoke quietly. "You and Daniel seem really close. He talks about you a lot." Laura's breath caught slightly. "He does." "Oh yes," Emily said with a soft smile. "He said you've been married a long time, that you're his calm place." For a moment, Laura felt relief. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe this was all just her imagination. "But then," Emily added softly, "he worries about you. He said he wishes you'd take more time for yourself." That line, so caring, yet so personal, made Laura's heart tighten again. She nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, her thoughts spiraled. When she left the studio, it was raining. The sky was gray and the city streets shimmered with reflections of passing cars. Laura walked slowly, letting the rain cool her face. She didn't know if she was angry, sad, or just tired. She loved Daniel deeply. That hadn't changed. But love wasn't always enough. Trust was the glue that kept love whole, and hers was starting to crack. That night, Daniel came home late again. She didn't ask where he'd been. She didn't want to hear a half-truth. Instead, she simply said, "I went to see Emily today." He paused in the doorway, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Oh, how was it?" "It was good," she said quietly. "She mentioned you talk about me." Smiled awkwardly. "Of course I do. You're my wife." She nodded slowly, studying his face. "And you talk about her?" That caught him off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," she said quickly, turning away. "Forget I asked," sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Laura, please don't start imagining things. She's just my therapist. That's all." "I know," she whispered. "I just miss us." He didn't respond. He stood there for a moment, then quietly walked away. Days turned into weeks. They talked less. The silence between them grew louder. Laura felt like she was living in the same house with a stranger who used to be her closest friend. One evening, she went through an old photo album, their wedding day, their first apartment, the vacations they used to take. They looked so young, so sure, so happy. She could almost hear the laughter through the pictures. When Daniel came home that night, she showed him the album. "Do you remember this trip?" she asked, pointing at a picture of them laughing near Lake Michigan. He smiled faintly. "Of course I do. You were holding me like you'd never let go," she said softly. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We were different then, were we?" she whispered. He didn't answer. The next day, Laura called her sister, Megan, who lived in New York. They hadn't spoken in months. But Laura needed someone to talk to. "Laura?" "You sound tired," Megan said gently. "I am," she admitted. "Daniel's been distant. I don't know if I'm imagining things, but something feels wrong." "Have you asked him directly?" "I tried. He gets defensive or changes the subject. I don't want to accuse him of something without proof." Megan sighed. "You don't need proof to feel neglected. Sometimes it's not about cheating, it's about disconnecting." Laura nodded slowly. "I just wish I knew what happened to us." "They'd find out," Megan said softly. Don't wait for him to explain. You deserve honesty. That night, Laura made a decision. She wasn't going to play detective, but she needed truth one way or another. When Daniel got home, she waited until he'd settled in. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course," he said, sounding cautious. She looked him in the eye. "I need to know what's going on. You've changed, Daniel. You're somewhere else lately, even when you're here." He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Laura, it's not what you think. I've just been stressed." "Then talk to me," she said gently. "Not Emily, me." Her words hung heavy in the air. He hesitated, then looked away. "She just listens," he said quietly. "She doesn't judge. I guess I needed that for a while." The words hurt more than she expected. "So you can talk to her, but not your wife." He looked back at her, guilt flickering across his face. "It's not like that. Then what is it like?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. He couldn't answer for a long moment. They sat in silence to people who once shared everything, now struggling to find even a single word. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She sat by the window again, the city lights flickering outside, and thought about what Daniel had said. He hadn't admitted to betrayal. Not in the way people imagine, but emotional distance could feel just as painful. Maybe it wasn't infidelity of the body, but of the heart. She opened her journal again and wrote, "Maybe love doesn't die suddenly. Maybe it fades when we start sharing pieces of ourselves with someone else." She closed the book. Wiping away tears the next morning. When Daniel left for work, Laura watched him go, wondering if he would stop by the studio again. Part of her wanted to follow, to see for herself. But another part, the stronger one, knew that some truths reveal themselves in time as the sun rose higher. She stood by the window, taking a deep breath. The ache in her chest was real, but so was her strength. She wasn't going to let silence destroy her. Laura didn't know what the next days would bring: confrontation, clarity, or heartbreak. But she knew one thing: she deserved honesty. And she was finally ready to face it. And deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "The truth always finds a way out." The morning after their talk, Laura felt a calm she hadn't known in weeks. Not peace exactly, more like quiet before a storm. She had asked for honesty, and even though Daniel hadn't given a direct answer, his silence said more than words ever could. Something between them had changed, and no amount of pretending could make it feel normal again. Days passed slowly. Daniel went about his routine as if nothing had happened. Work, gym, appointments. Laura watched him closely. Not with anger, but with a kind of sorrow that only comes from knowing the person you love is already half gone. She didn't confront him again. She wanted him to be the one to come forward, to say something, anything that proved there was still truth left between them. But he didn't. One evening, Laura decided to stop waiting. She needed closure, even if it hurt. She drove downtown after work straight to Emily's studio. Her hands trembled slightly as she parked. The sky was turning pink with sunset. And she sat for a long time before going inside. The receptionist recognized her and smiled warmly. "Laura, it's nice to see you again. Emily's with a client right now, but she'll be done soon." Laura's stomach turned. "That's fine," she said softly. "I'll wait." She sat in the quiet lobby, listening to the faint sound of instrumental music through the thin walls. After a few minutes, she heard laughter, Daniel's voice. She knew it instantly. The sound pierced through her chest like a whisper from another life. When the door opened, Daniel stepped out, surprised to see her. "Laura?" She stood slowly, forcing a calm tone. "I didn't realize you had an appointment today." He blinked, guilt flashing in his eyes. I thought I told you." "You didn't," she said quietly. Emily appeared behind him, polite and composed. "Laura." "Hi, is everything okay?" Laura nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I just came to talk." Daniel shifted awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should go home and—" "No," Laura said firmly. "We'll talk here." Emily stepped back, giving them space. Laura looked at Daniel for a long moment before speaking. I need you to tell me the truth. No excuses, no pretending. What's going on between you and her?" He hesitated, glancing at Emily, who looked equally stunned. "Laura, please don't do this here." "I think this is exactly where it should happen," she said softly but firmly, "because this is where it started." Daniel rubbed his face, the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. "It's not what you think," he said. "Then tell me what it is," she pressed. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've built a secret world I don't belong in." He looked at her, tired, conflicted, and finally sighed. "I didn't cheat, Laura. Not physically. But I crossed a line. I started talking to her about things I should have talked to you about." Laura's heart ached. "So you gave her the part of you that used to be mine." He looked down, ashamed. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was just lonely. We were distant, and Emily listened. That's all it was." Emily spoke gently. "Laura, I didn't mean to come between you two. I only ever wanted to help." Laura nodded slowly. "I believe you. But sometimes people get close without realizing how deep it's gone until it's too late." The room went quiet. Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. For a moment, Laura just stood there, holding back tears. She had imagined shouting, crying, demanding explanations. But instead, felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you finally stop wondering. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "I wish you had said it sooner." Daniel stepped forward. "Laura, please. I made a mistake. I know that now. I don't want to lose you." She looked at him sadly. "You already lost parts of me, Daniel. The parts that trusted without question." He reached out as if to touch her hand, but she stepped back. "I need time," she said. "Not punishment, not anger, just time to find myself again." He nodded, his voice breaking. "I'll give you whatever you need." Laura turned to Emily. "You're good at what you do," she said quietly. "But maybe you should remember that people who come to you are vulnerable. You have more power than you realize." Emily lowered her eyes. "You're right." Without another word, Laura walked out. Outside, the evening air was cool. The city lights flickered on as she stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply. For the first time in months, the ache in her chest didn't feel suffocating. It felt freeing. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just done living in confusion. When she got home, she sat on the couch and stared at the framed photo of her and Daniel from years ago, smiling, holding hands, filled with hope. That version of them was gone. But maybe, she thought, that didn't mean her story was over. Maybe it was just changing. The next morning, Daniel came home from work early. He found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee. "I took the day off," he said quietly. "Why?" she asked, not looking up. "Because I don't want to pretend anymore," he said. "You were right. I let something innocent turn into something that hurt us both. But I want to fix this if you'll let me." "What?" She looked at him, uncertain. "Fixing it means rebuilding trust." "That's not easy." "I know," he said. "But I'm willing to try no matter how long it takes." Laura studied his face. Tired, remorseful, honest. She had loved him for too long to hate him now. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," she said softly, "but I can try." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then that's enough for me." The following weeks were slow, fragile, but real. Daniel canceled his sessions with Emily and started therapy with Laura instead, a couples counselor they both agreed on. They learned to talk again, not just about problems, but about small, everyday things. Some nights they still sat in silence. But it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It was the silence of two people learning to listen again. One evening, while walking near the lake, Daniel stopped and looked at her. "I don't deserve another chance," he said, "but I'm grateful you gave me one." She looked out at the water, the sunlight glinting off the surface. "I gave us one," she said simply. Months later, Laura opened her journal for the first time since that night. She read her old entries full of pain, doubt, and fear, and then wrote a new one. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting what broke you and learning how to move forward anyway. She closed the journal with a soft smile. Years passed and their marriage found new rhythm. Not perfect, not effortless, but honest. Sometimes Laura still thought about Emily, not with bitterness, but with understanding. People make mistakes, she had learned. What matters is what you do after. She didn't see herself as a victim anymore. She was a woman who had faced the storm and chosen to rebuild. And Daniel, humbled and changed, never forgot what nearly losing her had taught him. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Daniel said quietly, "You know, sometimes I think that whole mess was a wake-up call." Laura smiled faintly. It was, but it woke us both. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. For the first time in years. The silence between them felt peaceful, not empty. The day began like any other, a quiet Saturday morning, the smell of fresh coffee, and the faint hum of Mark typing away on his laptop in the living room. Claire moved around the kitchen, cleaning up breakfast dishes, humming softly to herself. She'd gotten used to these quiet mornings. Mark worked long hours, even on weekends, and their conversations had slowly faded into short, practical exchanges, reminders, schedules, and the occasional, "How was your day?" When the doorbell rang, Claire wiped her hands and went to answer it. A tall man stood on the porch, his duffel bag resting by his feet, rain dripping from his coat. Before she could speak, Mark appeared behind her, his face lighting up with a smile she hadn't seen in months. "Ethan," he said, pulling the man into a hug. "You made it." Claire blinked. Ethan, Mark's childhood friend? She remembered Mark mentioning him once or twice, saying he might stay for a few days while sorting some things out. But she hadn't realized it would be this soon. Ethan turned to her, extending his hand with a polite smile. "You must be Claire. I've heard so much about you." His voice was calm, deep, and warm in a way that made her immediately at ease. She smiled back, shaking his hand. "Welcome. I hope the drive wasn't too bad." "Long, but I'm here," he said with a small chuckle. Mark helped carry his bags inside. And soon the house filled with the sound of old friends catching up. They talked about high school pranks, road trips, and the years that had slipped away too fast. Claire listened from the kitchen, feeling like an observer to a part of Mark's life she'd never really known. Ethan had a way of drawing people in, easy laughter, thoughtful pauses, stories that made you want to keep listening that night. After dinner, the three of them sat around the living room fireplace. The rain outside tapped gently on the windows. Mark eventually yawned and excused himself to bed, muttering something about an early meeting. Claire stayed a few minutes longer, tidying up the plates. Ethan helped without being asked. "You don't have to," she said. He smiled. "I like helping. Makes me feel useful." They washed dishes side by side, and it felt strangely natural to strangers finding quiet comfort in the rhythm of small chores. When they finished, Claire looked up and caught him watching the flames flicker in the fireplace. His face looked calm, almost thoughtful. "You've got a beautiful home," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied. "It's taken years to make it feel like one." "Mark's lucky," he said, turning toward her. "Not everyone gets to come home to something like this." The words were simple, but they stayed with her long after she went upstairs. The next few days passed easily. Ethan helped around the house, fixing small things that Mark had been too busy to get to. A loose cabinet handle, flickering porch light, a jammed window. He wasn't loud or intrusive, just present. He listened when she spoke, laughed at her dry humor, and thanked her for even the smallest kindness. Claire found herself looking forward to their brief conversations, the way he asked real questions, the way he noticed details Mark hadn't in years. But she reminded herself it was innocent. He was just a guest, a friend, nothing more. Then one evening, Mark came home later than usual, looking exhausted. "Long day," he muttered, grabbing a quick dinner and heading straight to his office upstairs. Claire stood at the counter, watching him disappear without a word of thanks or even a glance. The loneliness settled heavy in her chest. Ethan walked in a few minutes later. "Rough day?" he asked, for him. "Every day is," she said, with a weak laugh. He leaned against the counter. "What about you?" She hesitated. "I guess I've learned not to expect too much." He frowned. You shouldn't have to say that." She tried to smile, brushing it off, but his words struck something deep. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She went downstairs for a glass of water and found Ethan sitting by the window, reading under the dim light of a lamp. Couldn't sleep either. He asked. "Not really," she said, joining him. They talked for a while about life, about choices, about how things never turn out quite the way you expect. Claire found herself speaking more openly than she had in years. She told him about how Mark had changed after getting promoted, how their marriage had turned into a schedule instead of a partnership. Ethan listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. When she finally stopped talking, embarrassed by how much she'd said, he gave her a small smile. "You deserve to be heard, Claire. Sometimes people forget that listening is a kind of love too." Her breath caught at that. Not because of what he said, but because of how true it felt. She excused herself soon after, heart racing as she climbed the stairs. She knew she'd crossed some invisible line, not with her actions, but with her emotions. She'd let someone else see her, the part of her that even her husband no longer seemed to notice. The next morning, she tried to act normal. She cooked breakfast, made small talk, and avoided looking at Ethan for too long. But it was impossible to ignore the way her pulse quickened when their hands brushed while passing a cup of coffee later that afternoon. Mark called from work, saying he'd be staying overnight for a client dinner. It didn't surprise her anymore. She hung up, set down her phone, and stood by the window, watching the wind bend the trees in the yard. When Ethan came downstairs, he noticed her distant expression. "Everything okay?" She nodded. "Just tired." He hesitated before saying, "You don't have to keep pretending everything's fine." Something about his tone, soft, sincere, broke through her calm. She turned to him. "What am I supposed to do, Ethan?" "Walk away from everything I built." He looked at her for a long moment. "No, but maybe remember that you're still allowed to feel alive." Those words stayed with her long after he walked away. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder echoing in the distance. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The house fell into darkness. Claire lit candles in the kitchen, her heart oddly steady despite the storm. When Ethan appeared with a flashlight, their eyes met in the dim light. The air felt charged, not with fear, but with unspoken understanding. Mark was miles away, unreachable. The house was quiet except for the rain, and for the first time in years, Claire felt something she couldn't name. Not attraction exactly, but connection. Ethan helped her set more candles, their hands brushing occasionally. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was full of something deeper. He glanced at her once, and in that look, it was both restraint and recognition. When the power came back hours later, they both exhaled quietly, almost as if waking from a dream. Claire said goodnight and went upstairs, her heart pounding. In her room, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, a woman both frightened and awakened. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Yet something had begun, something she couldn't quite stop, something that felt both dangerous and inevitable that night. She dreamed of rain and candlelight, and of the quiet, steady gaze that had reminded her what it felt like to be seen, and though she tried to push it away in the morning light, she knew deep down temptation had already stepped inside her home. The morning after the storm, the air in the house felt different. Claire woke up early, hoping to shake off the restless thoughts that had kept her awake. She told herself it was just the weather, just a passing feeling. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. When she came downstairs, Ethan was already in the kitchen making breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air, and the simple sight of him there, calm, thoughtful, quietly smiling, made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Morning," he said warmly. "I've made extra coffee. Thought you might need it after that storm." "Thanks," she replied, trying to sound casual. "You didn't have to," he shrugged. "I wanted to." They ate quietly, making small talk about the rain and how peaceful the morning felt. But beneath the surface, there was tension. Not uncomfortable, just complicated. Every look, every word seemed to carry a weight they were both too careful to mention. Later. Mark called to say he'd be out of town for another night. He was calm, almost detached, mentioning how important this client was. Claire told him to be safe and hung up, feeling the silence settle over her again. Ethan noticed her expression. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Just work. He's staying another night." Ethan didn't say anything, but the understanding in his eyes was enough. They both knew what that meant. Another long evening in a quiet house that no longer felt like a home as the day went on. Claire tried to busy herself with chores, folding laundry, organizing shelves, watering plants, anything to distract herself. But Ethan was always nearby, helping without being asked, keeping the atmosphere gentle. When she dropped a glass, he caught her wrist just in time before the shards touched her hand. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a rush through her chest. "You okay?" he asked, still holding her hand for a moment longer than necessary. She pulled back slightly, nodding. "Yeah, just clumsy today." He smiled faintly, then went back to cleaning up the glass. It was nothing, a small, ordinary moment, but it lingered in her mind all day. That evening, they cooked dinner together. It wasn't planned. It just happened naturally. She started chopping vegetables, and he joined her, moving easily beside her as if they'd done this 100 times before. The radio played soft music in the background, and the rhythm of their movements filled the silence. When dinner was ready, they ate by candlelight again, not because the power was out this time, but because it felt calm, familiar. He told her about his past, how his last relationship had fallen apart because of distance and silence, the same kind that had crept into her own marriage. Claire listened, realizing how much they had in common, two people quietly longing for connection in lives that had become routine. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace again. The rain had returned, tapping lightly against the windows, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said, almost in a whisper, "You ever feel like you're living beside someone instead of with them?" She looked into the fire. Every day. It was the first time she had said it out loud. The truth hung in the air, heavy but freeing. Ethan didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was low. "You deserve to feel more than that, Claire." Her breath caught. She wanted to tell him to stop, to change the subject, but she couldn't, because part of her knew he was right. For years, she had been the one holding everything together, the house, the conversations, the quiet efforts that no one noticed. And now, someone finally saw her, understood her, and it was terrifying. She stood up, pretending to tidy the room. "It's getting late," she said softly. "We should get some sleep." He nodded, standing too. "Good night, Claire." When she turned toward the stairs, he added gently, "You're stronger than you think." She didn't look back, but she smiled faintly. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her marriage, about the years that had quietly drifted by, about the moments she'd given everything and received so little in return. And she thought about Ethan, his kindness, his patience, the way he made her feel seen. The next morning, she told herself to draw a line. Ethan would be gone soon, back to his own life, and she needed to stay true to her vows. Even if Mark had long stopped acting like a husband, she planned to keep things polite but distant. But life rarely listens to plans. Mark called again that day, not to check in, but to say he'd extended his trip through the weekend. Claire felt something inside her quietly break. She didn't cry. She just nodded to herself, said okay, and hung up. Ethan found her sitting by the kitchen window, staring at nothing. "Bad news?" he asked gently. "Just news," she said flatly. He didn't push her to explain. Instead, he poured her a cup of tea and sat with her in silence. That small act, sitting beside her without asking for anything, was enough to make her heart ache. Over the next few days, they spent more time together, walking the dog, cooking, talking about things that mattered and things that didn't. There were no confessions, no reckless words, just a quiet closeness that grew stronger each day. One afternoon, they drove into town to pick up groceries. The air was crisp, the sky gray with hints of rain. On the drive back, a song played on the radio, soft, nostalgic, and Claire found herself humming along. Ethan smiled. "You have a nice voice," he said. She laughed lightly. "It's out of tune. I like it anyway." It was such a simple exchange, but it filled the car with warmth. She turned to look out the window, hiding her smile. When they reached home, she thanked him for the ride, and he replied, "Anytime." Later that night, Mark called again, but this time Claire didn't rush to answer. She let it ring, then watched the screen go dark. She felt guilty not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she realized she no longer felt the need to explain herself. Ethan noticed her quiet mood and said, "You don't have to talk about it, but I'm here if you want to." She looked at him. Really looked at him, the calm eyes, the steady patience. And for the first time in years, she felt something she thought she'd lost: safety, that night. They sat outside on the porch, wrapped in blankets as the wind moved through the trees. The silence between them was soft, peaceful. He told her how he'd lost touch with who he was, chasing goals that didn't make him happy. She told him how she'd forgotten what happiness even felt like at one point. She said quietly, "I don't know what this is, Ethan, but it feels like breathing again." He looked at her for a long time before replying, "Then maybe that's all it needs to be, a reminder that you're still alive." She didn't answer, but she felt her chest loosen, her heart open in a way it hadn't in years. As the night deepened, they said goodnight and went to their rooms. But Claire didn't sleep. She stood by the window, thinking about the line between right and wrong, how close she was to crossing it, how easy it would be. Yet, more than guilt, she felt clarity. What she wanted wasn't chaos or betrayal. It was connection, warmth, understanding. That next morning, she told herself she'd talk to Mark when he returned. She'd tell him how she felt, how distant they'd become. Maybe they could fix things. Maybe it wasn't too late. But deep down, she knew that even if they did, she would never forget how it felt to be seen again, to be understood by someone. You didn't owe her anything, but gave her everything through simple kindness. And though nothing had happened, not in the way people might imagine, something powerful had changed. The boundaries of her heart had shifted. She had tasted something she didn't expect, not passion, but presence. And once you taste that kind of truth, pretending you don't need it becomes impossible. When she went to sleep that night, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll decide what to do." But the truth was, the decision had already been made, not by her mind, but by her heart. When Mark returned home that Sunday evening, the house looked the same. Warm lights, soft music, the scent of dinner still in the air. But Claire felt like she was standing in a place she no longer belonged to. She greeted him with a polite smile, trying to ignore how distant his hug felt. It wasn't anger or resentment. It was indifference. He talked about his trip, his clients, the big opportunity coming soon. She nodded, smiled, and listened like she always did. But for the first time, she realized how mechanical it all sounded. Ethan joined them later at the table, cheerful as always, but Claire could sense the tension building beneath the surface. Mark barely acknowledged him. The easy friendship they'd shared had faded into something quieter, cautious. She noticed how Mark's tone sharpened slightly when Ethan spoke, how his laughter seemed forced. After dinner, Mark went to take a call, and Ethan began helping Claire clean up. Their hands brushed once when reaching for a dish, and it sent a rush of unspoken awareness between them. She pulled away quickly, whispering, "Thank you. I can handle the rest." Ethan nodded, sensing her need for distance, and left for the guest room. Claire finished cleaning, her mind racing. She felt guilty not for something she'd done, but for everything she'd felt. It wasn't physical, but it was real. The connection, the warmth, the peace she'd found in Ethan's presence had become something she couldn't ignore. Later that night, Mark lay in bed scrolling through his phone, the glow lighting his face. Claire turned toward him. "Mark," she began softly. He looked up briefly. "Yeah, can we talk?" "About what?" "Us," she said simply. He sighed, setting his phone aside. "Claire, not tonight. I'm exhausted. Can we do this tomorrow?" Tomorrow? It was always tomorrow. She turned away, staring into the darkness. Her chest ached with something deeper than sadness. It was the pain of being unseen. For years, she had carried their marriage quietly, holding every broken piece together with hope. But hope had turned to habit, and habit had turned to emptiness. The next morning, she found Ethan outside, fixing a loose shutter on the porch. The air was cool and bright. It's the kind of morning that made everything feel fresh, except her heart. "You don't have to do all that," she said. "I don't mind," he replied. "It helps me think." They stood in silence for a moment. Then she said softly, "Mark and I aren't happy. We haven't been for a long time." Ethan looked at her, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. "I know," he said. "I can see it." Claire felt tears build in her eyes. "I don't know when it happened. I just kept pretending things were fine because that's what you're supposed to do. But I don't even know who we are anymore." He set down his tools and turned to face her. "You deserve to feel alive, Claire. Not just comfortable alive." His words pierced through her. That was it. She hadn't felt alive in years. Her days had become patterns. Wake up, cook, clean, listen, nod, sleep. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost herself. She whispered, "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Ethan said. "It's brave." Their eyes met again, and she saw in his expression the same pull she'd been trying to fight. But this time, she didn't step back. She didn't move at all. For a long moment, they just stood there, not saying anything, not touching, but understanding everything. Finally, Claire took a deep breath and said, "I can't do this. Not like this." "I know," Ethan replied quietly, "and I'd never ask you to." That evening, Mark noticed how quiet Claire was. "You okay?" he asked while eating dinner. She looked at him across the table. "Mark, do you ever think we stopped trying?" He frowned, trying. "What do you mean?" "I mean us," she said, her voice calm. "When was the last time we really talked about something that mattered?" Mark hesitated. "Claire, we've just been busy. Life happens." "No," she said softly. "That's not it. We stopped seeing each other long before life got busy." He set his fork down, his tone sharp. "Is this about Ethan?" Her heart dropped. "What? You think I don't notice?" "The way you talk to him, the way he looks at you." Claire straightened, her voice steady. "Nothing happened, Mark. But maybe it says something that you noticed it only now." He didn't respond. The silence that followed was heavy, full of years of unspoken words. After dinner, Claire went for a walk. The sky was dusky purple and the air smelled like rain. She needed space, clarity, something to anchor her thoughts. When she returned, Ethan was waiting by the porch steps, concern written across his face. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded faintly. "Just needed air." He hesitated. "Maybe I should find another place to stay for a while." Her heart sank, though she knew he was right. "Maybe that's best," she said softly. They stood there for a long moment, the weight of everything between them pressing like the stillness before a storm. Then Ethan said, "Claire, whatever happens, don't lose the part of you that woke up again. Even if it wasn't me. Remember what it felt like to feel something real?" Tears filled her eyes. "I'll remember." The next morning, Ethan packed his things. Mark left early for work, silent and withdrawn. When Ethan stepped to the door, he paused. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she whispered. And then he was gone. The house felt emptier than before. Claire wandered through the rooms, each one echoing with silence. But beneath the ache, she felt something unexpected clarity. For the first time in years, she wasn't living on autopilot. She saw her marriage for what it had become, not cruel, but lifeless. That evening, when Mark came home, Claire was waiting in the living room. "We need to talk," she said. He sat down cautiously. "Is this about him?" "This is about us," she said. "We're not happy, Mark. Not really. We've been pretending for so long that we forgot how to be honest." He looked away. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to find myself again," she replied. "And I can't do that if we keep living like this." Mark was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Do you still love me?" She swallowed hard. "I care about you deeply, but love." I don't know what that word means for us anymore. Mark nodded slowly, the truth sinking in. Maybe we both stopped trying, he said quietly. They talked for hours about where things went wrong, about who they'd become. For once there was no blame, no anger, just truth. It was painful, but it was real. In the weeks that followed, they agreed to take space, time apart to understand what they wanted. Mark moved into a temporary apartment near his office. And Ethan sent a short message before leaving town entirely. You deserve peace, Claire. Don't lose it. Claire started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. The colors came slowly, uncertain at first, but each stroke felt like a piece of herself returning. She joined a local art class, met new people, began taking long walks by the river. For the first time, she wasn't living for someone else. Months later, Mark called her. They met for coffee, and he smiled genuinely, gently. He told her he was working on himself too. They didn't make promises, but they shared respect. The kind that comes from finally being honest. That night, Claire stood by her window, watching the sunset fade into gold and gray. She thought of everything that had happened. The storm, the laughter, the guilt, the clarity. Ethan had been the spark that reminded her what it meant to feel alive. But the real journey had been her own, finding courage to face the truth. Temptation hadn't destroyed her. It had awakened her, Todd, she whispered to herself. Sometimes life tests us not to show our weakness, but to show us what we've forgotten about strength. And as the first stars appeared, Claire smiled, not with regret, but with peace. She hadn't chosen another man. She'd chosen herself.